All right. Let's get into this, um, Emory, in terms of your quarterbacks. And this is really interesting to me because you were on this guy as your number one guy before the season, and nothing changed to stop that now. Your number one ranked quarterback still Anthony Richardson from Florida. To my knowledge, you're the only person that has him number one. Talk about it.
Well, this is why, Ross. It's a combination of the traits, physical talent, and the potential upside. So when you look at a guy that's not gonna be 21 years old, or gonna be 21 years old, he's a young player. So he still has growth left within his game. We know his biggest weakness, in my opinion, is his lack of experience. Only one full season as a starter. He played a lot of games last year behind Emory Jones, but I always pointed to those games that we saw him play last year as a reason why you can trust that projection moving forward. You look at his game against LSU, the complete game. This is someone that was able to manage the ebbs and flows of a game and almost came out on top. Again, I keep bringing it up. Had he not gotten hit on that last throw that was intercepted, he made the right read. He made the right throw. It would have been a touchdown, and they probably win that ball game against LSU. So transition forward, everyone wants to. It's funny how people do this, Ross, because they use it as an argument for a person they like, and they use it as an argument against a person they don't like or a prospect they don't like. They talk about completion percentage, right? Well, completion percentage doesn't really matter. It's not a true sign of accuracy. That's for the person that they like. For the person that they don't like, I mean, look at his accuracy. He only completed 53% of his passes, right? But when you watch the game, let's take a look at the Florida State game. You see how many drops he had in a row. Some of these are drops. Some of these are just throwaway passes. So, yes, every pass tells a story. But if you look at just completion percentage, you will focus on that and say he's not accurate. That's far from the truth. He may be a little bit inconsistent with placement. That's a different story than just general accuracy. His mobility is where it needs to be. He's a +1 in the run game. He's a legit game breaker from that aspect. And when you look at someone that has the upside in the passing department, combined with what he does athletically, yes, he is my number one. And if I'm Houston or Indy, one of those top two picks, Carolina, if I'm trading up, the Raiders, significant, especially when you look at what all these teams already have in tow from a weapon standpoint. Houston far less than everyone else I mentioned. That's the guy you want to plug in and helps enhance your offense.
Emory, do you like him enough that you would draft him if you're the Bears and trade Fields, or no?
No, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. That whole suggestion of taking someone number one and trading Fields is probably the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And it's funny how it starts this offseason. And it's like, hey, you just watch Justin Fields do ridiculous things all season long. And the first thought that comes to people's mind is, well, they need to, perhaps entertain the thought of taking the quarterback. But you don't hear that for the Pittsburgh Steelers. You don't hear that for the New England Patriots, the Chicago Bears. We just watched this dude rush for 100 yards in the first quarter against the Detroit Lions. And you saw the team that they had around him, youthful team. They have a ton of picks and a ton of money. Why is that even a question? It's probably the most absurd thought and comments that we've heard all across this beginning part of the season, off season. It's par for the course though, but it's just one of the dumbest things I've ever heard.
Second ranked quarterback for you is Bryce Young from Alabama.
Yeah, Bryce Young is dynamic. When I say dynamic, I mean, talking about both ends of offense as a scrambler and as a passer. Like, he's going to find a way to make a way. And you love guys like that. Plus, he's battle tested. Talking about how many big games he's played in across his college career, significant games. We just talked about this with Jalen Hurts. We talked about this with Tua Tagovailoa. These are the guys that are mentally ready to handle whatever is thrown at them in the NFL. And if you're looking for, let's say, a plug-and-play guy, he would probably be the one. So if you're looking for someone to help steer if you're one player, if you're a quarterback away, right? So if you are Indianapolis, if you are, in my opinion, Carolina, hell, if you are the Raiders, Bryce Young should be the focal point for what you want to do right now today. You could draft Bryce Young and go play a game. I am not too particularly worried about him being about 5'11", 190. He's been that size his whole football life at the highest of levels, and it hadn't been an issue. Obviously, we all know this. As you get older, you're going to gain some weight. He'll find a way to put some weight on him, and so he'll be fine moving forward. But he's not 165. He's not a rail thin. He is narrow, but he does have the ability to, I think, to add 5 to 10 more pounds on his frame.
Yeah, I mean, he's always played well every game I've ever watched. I don't think I've ever seen him have a bad game. Right. I'm sure he has, but I never. Every game I've ever watched, he plays well. And I've seen all the stats about quarterbacks that are less than 200 pounds, and it just doesn't happen. You know what that reminds me of, Emory? That reminds me of there was a while there where it was like you can't take these really thin wide receivers. They're just not big enough for these receivers. Devonte Smith, not big enough. He's too skinny. How's that working out? I mean, he set the franchise record for receptions for the Eagles this year. I think on some level, and I was a heavy guy. I'm a thick guy, right? I think that's a little bit overrated. These smaller receivers, these lighter receivers, it's easier for them to get in and out of their breaks. They're able to be better route runners because they don't have that much weight going one direction when they break the other. I mean, Hollywood Brown. I mean, you go down the list, there's a bunch of guys that they said they're too skinny, and it's like, wait a minute, isn't he playing pretty well? Isn't he pretty good? I don't know. I mean, everybody wants it to be Calvin Johnson. Good luck getting a guy like Calvin Johnson that can actually run routes and get in and out of their breaks.
Yeah, it's funny because it's always funny when the young, I hate to say the youth, Ross, because, it almost kind of indicts us for being older, but it is what it is, right? It's always funny when the youth come at me and say, well, I mean, you got to be 6'3", 230. Like, bro, I grew up watching Flipper Anderson. Like, there's nothing you could tell me about somebody being big or whatnot. I grew up watching Ricky Sanders and those guys tearing up the NFL, Mark Duper and Mark Clayton. Like, get out my face with that nonsense. You know what I'm saying? It's almost like the running back position. You brought up a great point. When people say, oh, you got to have guys that are built like Derrick Henry or Jim Brown, like those are rare breeds. Eddie George, rare breed. Ideally, you want a shorter running back because of what you talked about. Change the direction skills. It's easy to shift that weight left to right to make a guy miss. It's hard for these taller guys with these taller, these higher centers of gravity to try to evade defenders. The last time I checked, it's about making guys miss and scoring the ball. And lighter guys tend to have that approach. Yes, sometimes you have bigger guys that play light. Sometimes you have lighter guys that play big. And you want the guy that plays the right way. And I think when you look at a Bryce Young, you look at a Devonte Smith, those guys are the type of small guys that you don't worry about.
Download the DraftKings app now. Use code Ross. You can bet $5 on any pregame money line bet in the NBA and get $150 in bonus bets if your team wins. We talked about this on on Even Money podcast. This is a no-brainer. Like, there's heavy favorites. Take a heavy favorite for $5, and you're basically getting a free $150 in bonus bets only at DraftKings Sportsbook with code Ross. All right, number 3 guy, C.J. Stroud, Emory.
Another one, and full disclosure, and these are the guys will see this in the draft guide, but Stroud, Richardson, and Bryce Young all have the same grade, in my opinion. I just ranked them 1, 2, and 3 like that for different reasons, right? But you'll have to find out where they differ in the draft guide. But the overall grade is the same. Stroud, I compared to Troy Aikman before. I think he has good pocket mobility. He's a good enough runner if he has to be. We saw that all throughout his career, but I think people just kind of got hip to it, in the Georgia game in the playoff. But here's another one. If you are Indianapolis, I'm picking spots to peg these guys. I think this is where they'll be ideal. right away. If you are Indianapolis, if you're Oakland, if you're Carolina, CJ Stroud would be ideal for you because of what he can do throwing the football and what you already have in tow at receiver, also at running back and up front along the offensive line. He is a really good player, point and shoot passer. He is someone that can beat you from the pocket consistently with just enough athleticism to get out on the move. That's an area where he's going to have to really grow his game, is throwing on the move. But in terms of being within the pocket, making reads downfield and at the intermediate level of the field, and where he's placed in the football, his placement is top tier. His accuracy is top tier. I think he got better over the course of last year to what we're seeing this year from an accuracy standpoint. And I just feel like he has what we talked about with Bryce Young and the other Alabama quarterbacks, big game status in terms of playing in these big games, being mentally ready to go, had to deal with the doubters, had to deal with some adversity at Ohio State, got them to the playoffs and played well and probably should have won that playoff game against Alabama. So in my opinion, you want these guys that are mentally tough. I talked about this with Jalen Hurts before and also Joe Burrow. People try to find out and try to figure out what the it is, or they try to quantify the it, but you know it when you see it, and CJ Stroud has the it that you want at the position.
Number 4 is the one that really jumped out to me. Todd Clement from JMU. I did one of his games a couple years ago when he's playing for Colorado State. You have him as the 4th best quarterback prospect? Tell me about it.
Yeah, and here's the thing with Todd Clement. We watched him at Colorado State. I remember watching him get beat down against South Dakota State, but I was like, this quarterback not bad for Colorado State. Then when you watch JMU and you put 2 and 2 together, I'm like, oh, that's a dude from Colorado State. But this is why I love grading so many prospects, right? Because things will jump out at you and it'll be hard to ignore. If you just work off the same standard list that's thrown at you, like, hey, here are the top 5 guys you want to talk about and focus on, and then you'll miss everybody else. But when you watch everybody, you kind of can rank and file, okay, this dude does this well, this dude does that well. Centeio was someone that was pleasantly surprised at how consistent he was throwing the football and operating the offense at JMU. He was a Sun Belt Conference Offensive Player of the Year, as well as the newcomer of the year. So that speaks volumes to what he was able to do, because, again, you have Grayson McCall in that conference as well. And so you're watching him operate, just making these throws, moving the offense down the field, playing a real a great game above the X's and O's. Then you see him down at the Tropical Bowl, or he did really well there, and then he got the call up to the Hula Bowl, not Hula Bowl, the NFLPA Bowl was excellent there as well. So not only are you watching him excel at 2 different programs, FBS programs, JMU FBS this year, but also you saw him excel at 2 separate All-Star games. So now he's playing great football against different competition in different conferences, and then goes to the All-Star game and is playing with receivers that he doesn't know in an unfamiliar environment, a stressful one because you got scouts watching, and performs really well. And he came in at 6 feet, 5'11" and some change, 215, 220 pounds. So he's well put together, good athleticism, throws well over the middle of the field, and does a great job situationally. So for me, those are the type of guys that hey man, it was hard to ignore the consistency, the growth from, program to program, and what he was doing out there in those all-star game settings. So the total view of Todd Clement was pretty positive.
Next up, your number 5 guy, Jaren Hall from BYU.
Hall was someone that really was impressive every time he played. The problem with Hall was how many times he played. You want to see him shake the injury bug that just seems to have snake bitten him. Had he not gotten hurt, Zach Wilson doesn't start, because he was the starter before Zach Wilson got hurt. Zach Wilson jumped in and did what Zach Wilson was able to do at BYU. And so Jaren Hall was able to regain the starting job last year, played really well, but he is someone that operates offense, extremely well. He can make all the throws that you loved about Zach Wilson, but he also adds the running component too. So he's a +1 in the run game. with the ability to consistently hit the deep ball down the field. He moves the offense well. It's the injury concerns, man, and i.e. the concussions. Then when you factor in, he's going to be 24, 25 years old. So you're dealing with an older prospect. And so you wonder, okay, what we're seeing capped, or does he still have a little bit more to grow? I know he still has a little bit more to grow because he hadn't played a lot, unlike a guy that's just that number 6 on my list. We'll get to in a second. But I think that's why I have Hall slightly rated ahead of who's at number 6.
Last but not least in our top 6 today, Hendon Hooker from Tennessee, who was playing unbelievable until he got hurt.
Yeah, he reminds me a lot of Geno Smith. That was my comp for him and how he throws the football. Just a smooth stroke. Intermediate passing is where he lives. And that's just great for the NFL because a lot of what you have to do throwing the football, we get enamored by the deep ball, but that's few and far in between. It's the short to intermediate game. And if you can live in that intermediate area of the field, if you could thrive there, that's where you're going to have success. And that's where Hendon Hooker has success. Again, older prospect, going to be 25. He was solid at Virginia Tech. We used to always wonder why he wasn't the starter consistently at Virginia Tech. But he goes to Tennessee, plays well last year, takes off this year. So you're seeing the trajectory of him going in the right direction. You just hate that he had the ACL injury so late in the season. But it was good to see him down at the Senior Bowl, walking around in good spirits. From what I've heard, he's been able to do some drills. So it looks like he's going to be on track for, I don't want to put a time limit out there, but it looks like he's trending in the right direction, put it that way. But you like that about him. So he's coming off of an injury and he's going to be 24, 25. So, the upside potential is there. I know people say, hey, quarterbacks can play into their 40s. How many are actually playing into their 40s and how many are actually doing really well? If we can look at this from a, can he give us good football from a 5-year to 8-year window? That's perfect. So that will put him right at about 33 in 8 years. That's fine, but I do feel like he has that Geno Smith type of ability of throwing the football. The intermediate areas is where he excels. He puts the ball right on the money where it needs to be. And coming from these conferences where he's played a lot of big games, played some big games in the ACC. We know he played big games this past season at Tennessee, had these guys, first in the country for a good stretch. That's getting the job done, especially with the upset against Alabama.
Really is unbelievable, Emory. When I was 25, I was in my 4th year in the NFL.
Right.
I mean, think about that. It doesn't bother me for a quarterback, especially because those guys can play longer. And are you that worried about his 3rd contract? You know what I mean? Like, who cares about the guy's 3rd contract? It's a 2-year league, but it's just wild. I mean, my rookie year, I was 22. My 2nd year, I was 23. 3rd year, 24. 4th year, when I was 25, I started 25 games, played 45. It's just kind of wild to think about that. I did note, Emory, a guy that's going to go in the first round, probably even top 10, that you did not have in your top 6. His name is Will Levis. And next week, when we go over your tier 2 quarterbacks, the next 5 or 6 guys on your list, fascinated to see where Levis falls out of that bunch, and definitely going to get your take on why you're so much lower on Levis than everybody else appears to be. That's a little bit of a tease for next week.